Welcome back, everyone, to our brand new interview series from us here at the CommonTime team to you called CommonTime One on One. In this interview series, we are working to connect with the artists, arts entrepreneurs, educators, and other people doing the work in our favorite field, the arts. This is the second installment of this interview series, and we have a very special guest with us today. This is someone that I met along my international journey in China. And my biggest takeaways from her was that she is a great listener. She also has a very, very kind spirit, and I think she is quite knowledgeable when it comes to working with children, social emotional learning, wellness, and well being. You know, that holistic approach that's such a buzzword now in education. I want to let her introduce herself, but I know she has been a school counselor in the past. She has served in many different capacities, whether in mental health, in schools, but a lot of her focus has been working with children, which is why I invited her to this interview today. I want to introduce you all to Laura Stanley.
Thanks,
Yes, and
Michael.
welcome Laura to Common Time One on One. Um, Laura, how you doing? And I mean that genuinely. I feel like a lot of people, when they ask how you're doing, they don't really
hmm
they're not really interested in hearing the whole story. They just want you to say good and move on. But I'll
Right.
ask you sincerely, how are you doing? How are you feeling today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm a little tired this morning. It's morning here, in Oregon where I am,
Okay.
but yeah, we have had nice weather. I'm kind of getting back or into a good rhythm with my new schedule, which is good. Um, yeah, I feel like overall I'm doing well. I do feel a little envious that you're abroad again, and I definitely am feeling a bit restless and like I want to go somewhere and I want to
Yeah.
travel. I'll probably always feel like that, but hopefully before long we'll see what happens. Just things are
The world
very
will still be there. Let me
yeah.
show you now. Let me show you the dark side of living in the Middle East. Right
Okay.
now, it is 8:30 at night. What do you think the temperature is? Now it's dark, mind you. It's 8:30 at night. What do you think the temperature is?
Well, I know it's been really hot there, so I want to say like 90 something around 90.
It's 97.
Oh my gosh.
But that's
Wow.
pretty close, which to me is pretty surprising for night. The sun's been down at this point for a couple hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So I am a little bit envious of the Pacific Northwest nice weather
hmm
that you described.
Yeah.
So, Laura, I briefly kind of went over who you are. Would you like to take a couple moments just to like explain what you do, maybe what your work is now, maybe a
hmm
little bit about your career and just, like who you are?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm in Oregon. I'm an LPC, which is a licensed professional counselor. I've worked a lot in schools. I've also been working in basically what is a psychiatric hospital, both with kids and adults, and that's primarily what I'm doing right now, which I really enjoy. It's just very interesting, kind of the presentations that show up there. So yeah, I before I went to China, I worked in a big high school here in the US, or sorry, in Portland. It was the biggest high school in Oregon, I think, very diverse, which was cool. So I I wasn't a typical school counselor. I was very focused on mental health. So I wasn't doing like scheduling and that type of thing. There were other counselors doing that. And then there was a whole team that just focused on mental health needs. So when the school counselors, the more traditional school counselors would meet with the kids and find that they had, mental health struggles that were kind of beyond what they could help them with because they were so busy, which is kind of typical of people in the traditional school counselor roles, then they would refer them to us. And, a lot of students, it was difficult for them to go to outpatient appointments. So it just was more convenient for them to meet in schools. So yeah, it was a really good experience. And then in China, it was similar to that as well. Like I wasn't doing scheduling. I was really just focused on mental health needs of the kids for the most part. I would do some class visits, especially mindfulness with students. But yeah, just I was only counselors, in the whole school, so I didn't have
Yeah,
time to
that was a big
take care
job.
of all the students in that way, like the scheduling and all that. But yeah, I could focus on mental health, which was great and is what I enjoy. So.
Why do they make, now that you say this, it's making me think, why do they make counselors schedule? And I think it's not just in the US. I would imagine other international school systems too, their counselor kind of does scheduling.
Yeah,
And
they
now that
do.
I'm thinking about it, that really doesn't make sense. Like you have all that training, all that education to spend the bulk of your time looking at timetables and spreadsheets. Like that doesn't
Right.
make sense to me now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if it totally makes sense too. And I think a lot of counselors, that's not why they go into it. And
No, who wants to be a scheduler? There's no degree called scheduling.
right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, I'm sure interesting conversations come from that and they can maybe help advise them based on their needs or whatever. But yeah, I don't feel like that would have been super fulfilling for me. And I should say too, like my training is more as a general mental health practitioner. Like I did do my internship in a school when I was doing my master's, but I
Oh,
didn't
I see.
my degree is not just school counseling. That's why I've worked in different settings and I really wanted to have that
Got you.
ability to do different things. Like I'm also working on starting a private practice and like it's much harder for school counselors to do
Hey.
that kind of thing. I mean, working
Yeah.
on like I haven't really done much towards it, but that's my plan. So
Well, you just spoke it into existence. That's half the battle.
yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
really realize that school counseling versus, I thought school counselors, because my mom was also a counselor. I
Yeah.
think she has similar to degrees as you. She never worked in
Hmm.
school. She mostly worked with substance abuse. But I kind of thought all counselors were the same. Like I know it's a master's,
Mm.
and but I didn't know school counseling was like its own subset
Yeah, it's definitely a
thing.
specialized thing. And I think some school counselors, like everyone in their own specialization, is like everyone should have this who's doing this or whatever, which I understand too. But I think there's also a lot of benefit to having more general training because I think sometimes I don't want to generalize too much, but I think sometimes they don't have as much like clinical training on how to respond to certain issues, which makes sense because they're not really supposed to
Yeah.
necessarily. They don't have time to. But when you're in a situation like China where you don't have many people to refer to, I think it's really helpful. That was a huge, a huge challenge there. Because here, in the US, especially in a city, like there's tons of options. I'm not saying like we have all the resources we should or we need, but there's kind of a wealth of organizations that you can refer to with different specializations, say for eating disorders or addictions or whatever, but in China, I mean, just to find people who speak the same language as the kid, I mean, it was,
Right.
and it's just not a huge thing. I mean, there just aren't a lot. I mean, compared to the population, there just aren't a lot of mental health professionals. And I think that's changing. I think there's a lot of awareness about the need now, especially after the pandemic. But I think there's a
Yeah.
long ways to go. So
Yeah. It
that's
was interesting
stressful.
seeing. I know that mental health wasn't something that was talked about a lot in China, and seeing
Yeah.
the way some of our parents would react to certain things. Like I know a common practice for us is we would sometimes bring in outside help to help with certain students or maybe help figuring out
Yeah.
what their particular needs were and
Hmm.
things that we call in the States like an IEP or a 504. When you
Right.
present that type of information to some of those parents in there, it was like devastating. And I think that just is
Yeah.
a testament to how new that subject or that mindset is in the country. And we'd have to
Hmm.
remind parents like he's not broken. All we're
Right.
saying is we're gonna give the student more time when reading. Like that's
Hmm.
really what like or all we're
Yeah.
saying is we're going to spend some more one-on-one time with them to do this or that. Like that's really all it ever came down to. But just
Mm-hmm.
the newness of mental health in that region, some of the parents, it's like you would thought you were amputating a leg or something
Right.
like
Yeah,
that.
there's so much stigma, and I guess a lot of it's about saving face and looking a certain way, but
Yeah,
and which I understand, and I always, of course, want to be really culturally sensitive, but you see the kid not getting their needs met, and ultimately it's really devastating for them, and to have people not really understand what's going on with them and how to meet their needs best. Um,
yeah, yeah.
I
How to
mean, there.
meet needs. I like the way you describe that. As we're meeting, it's not about fixing. It's not about we're meeting. It's on us. Like the work is on
Mhm.
us, not the child. We're trying to meet your needs, not make you conform to what we need.
Right. Yeah, yeah, like everyone learns different, everyone has, yeah, just unique needs, and um you know there's obviously a lot of issues in the US, but I think that's one thing that's good is that's law, you have to provide those accommodations. And I think that was hard for me to be a part of and to witness in China, is that it was on the families to pay for most of that. I mean, I
Right.
was paid by the school, and I would obviously meet with their kids if they wanted to, if they needed to. But other than that, like the one-on-ones and the testing and all of that had to come out of pocket, and it's very, very expensive to do the psych ed testing. And like they had to go to Shanghai or Beijing for the most part, which is also very
That's
expensive.
where
They
like
can't.
the only child psychiatrist or might be.
Yeah, the only centers that could really work, especially students who didn't speak Mandarin, I guess. And I mean, recently I think there's a local option in Xi'an too, but yeah, it's a lot to ask of families for sure.
No, I bet. That kind of brings me to my first question. So, especially given the pandemic and everything our students have been through with school and health and just the general 2020, 2021 lifestyle, in your dealings with students and children, what's the mindset of, I say the world, I know you don't know every child in the world, but what's the mindset of the world's children? Like, what are they saying? What's it like to be a kid? I guess I should ask a kid this, but you're the closest I have right now. What's it like to be a child right now? Like, what are you hearing from students about their own lives in 2021?
I mean, I think what could be said probably across the board is there's been a huge increase in anxiety. Um, just being exposed to the media about the coronavirus and just everything else that kids are exposed to. But I mean, that's, I think, what we saw at the school we were working at in China, and what I read and hear about, and definitely at the hospital too. I mean, you see the kids who are struggling the most there. But yeah, just worried about the future. So much unpredictability can cause a lot of anxiety, not knowing what school is going to look like, not knowing if suddenly it's going to go back to 100% online, or there's so many unknowns. So I think, yeah, the anxiety piece is really huge, and not necessarily having the tools they need to manage that, and not really having caregivers who can model that either a lot of the time, unfortunately, has been really
Because dad
hard.
is stressed out too. And that just
Right,
makes it even
exactly.
twice as hard on them because they can't even lean on us, because we don't know what. I don't know if my job's gonna go back 100% online.
Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, so just feeling that anxiety, even if parents are, doing their best to manage it, it's hard not to show some of it, and that's okay. We're human, it's like you can't completely hide that. But that, and just the social isolation that I think was happening to some extent. I think that's probably better with schools most places in back in person, I believe. Not everywhere, but yeah, just that lack of peer connection that kids need so much. So I think that contributed to depression too. And I definitely saw kids who they were doing pretty well before the pandemic, and then like it just all the stressors related to that
So
really
true.
exacerbated,
Yeah, it's
whatever it
out
was,
the window.
underlying stuff that they had, some who are really high functioning that just really like took a dive, or maybe who are just kind of barely managing with other challenges and just like couldn't and kind of fell apart. So I think for some kids, yeah, it's been a little bit, a straw that broke the camel's back. But I
Yeah,
also want to say that there are some kids who it seems they've done better online, that it's been, more comfortable for them or for whatever reason, like maybe school is not a great place for everybody, and like maybe kids who feel more like outcasts or whatever. So I think there are some kids who it's actually maybe been a little better. And I heard that from some kids too last year, that they were happier that way. Although at least one kid I can think of who said that then once she went back to school, she's like, oh no, this is actually
I
good.
take it
I think
back.
she realized that she had missed that. And yeah, so I think it depends. I think obviously we all need a lot of human connection. That's how we evolved, in community. So I don't think you can really take that away completely and feel fulfilled. And online, it counts, but it's not, if you're not getting like face-to-face interaction with peers,
Yeah.
that's a struggle.
Laura's
Um,
talked about students, for you all out there in internet land. Lars is another colleague of ours that I actually interviewed on the first Common Time one-on-one series. Check out our blog post on the blog tab at commontime.online and check that out. Just a shameless plug. He talked about some students doing better during online learning because of the lack of micromanagement, especially when the kids were at home and we were doing online learning. There wasn't this whole like, take out your textbooks, turn to page 40, answer these questions. It was kind of more like, hey, these are some of our tasks for the week. It's due on Thursday. During this time, I would like for you to be focused on my subject, but at the same time, we both understand that I can't really make you do anything. And we kind of thought that we were going to just receive kind of nothing from the students. But in that circumstance, a lot of our students who were underperforming before actually started doing their work because it was
yeah,
kind of this idea of like, maybe I'll do it tonight, or maybe I'll do it then, or maybe I'll do it now. But it was like the flexibility of schedule with the online learning maybe like made it a little bit easier for them to meet deadlines or like turn in work
right.
and
Yeah, and I think especially maybe for more introverted students, not having to like exert the energy to interact all the time, and
yeah.
everything that's involved in getting to school and getting home, and maybe just having more energy to put into school work too could be a factor.
Because it is draining trying to be friends. Another thing I thought about too is working with ESL learners, who both of us
Mm-hmm.
work with a lot. I think the consistency. So when we were online, everything was on our learning management system. I'm sure this is consistent with all schools that went virtual. And I kind of think that the consistency of 100% written instruction also
Mm-hmm.
helped our English language learners
Mm.
because they were come thinking now when we were in person, there's this mix between a worksheet maybe with written instruction and then me verbally giving you instruction. That like mix between mediums may make it
Mm-hmm.
difficult for students who are more that are better at reading versus writing or writing
Mm-hmm.
versus listening or so I think
Yeah.
maybe that had an effect too with why at least some of our ESL students performed better in the pandemic was because they were just reading versus trying to
Right.
understand my southern drawl telling them what to do.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. I think that can be a factor too, for sure. Hopefully, it's not that their parents were doing their work for them, but yeah.
I didn't even think of that. Maybe that's why they're turning in the work.
I think I'm saying that
Oh,
because I feel like I vaguely remember kind of a situation like that, or like they could be on top of them more, like finish this. Like I know some parents are like sitting
like
with them.
making them do it.
Yeah, which is not really ideal, but in some ways, but depending
Yeah.
on the age, I guess. But
So I loved hearing what you thought about kind of the mental state of our children now. You talked a lot about that loss of consistency with
Mm-hmm.
the school moving to virtual. Some students that you thought were progressing, they kind of backtrack. You talked a lot about that need for social interaction. You kind of talked a lot about anxiety in the children and the parents. But I want to bring this back to the arts, which is our favorite subject here at Common
Mm-hmm.
Time, and ask you how you think the arts and just arts education can kind of help with anxiety, um, increasing social interaction, helping provide some sense of home for the students, even if it's kind of a mental sense of home, not necessarily like a physical place. Like, how do you think the arts and arts education can tie into that idea that you're describing?
Yeah, I mean, I think they provide an amazing way for kids to express themselves. And so I think it's so ideal for managing anxiety or expressing it or any whatever, they're dealing with, because kids typically enjoy it, and it fosters connection because you can create something and then share it with others, and they might get some sense of what you're going through, so it can kind of decrease isolation. And just expressing your emotions and naming them, even if it's not like writing the exact emotion, but expressing it through like a piece of art or music, I mean, it is really helpful and can be really therapeutic. So there's definitely so much potential, to use the arts to help kids in that way. And of course, if they're enjoying it, it's going to make it that much more effective because they're going to be motivated to do it and excited about it. So it's, much different than saying, okay, write an essay on mental health and
Right.
how you've been
Write
doing
a
or something.
10-page essay on the meaning of sadness, like,
Right.
or like
Yeah.
something like that.
Most kids aren't going to be so excited about that. I mean, some might, but for the most part, they're not. And also, it's a way, like, sometimes the kids don't necessarily know what they're expressing, like the underlying meaning, and that's okay too, and that's
Mm.
something. That's why I think in therapy or counseling, it can be really helpful to use the arts, because everybody has these defenses, and so sometimes you're like, oh, I shouldn't talk about that, that's too vulnerable. You might not consciously think that, but you just
Mm.
have this like kind of block with some subjects. But when you use the arts, um, people, kids, whoever, will express themselves a lot more in a more indirect way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like you might not know how to vocalize what you're feeling, but there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason the sky is black in your painting. Like, it kind of goes into that idea that they're able to express themselves in a little bit more of a roundabout fashion than just directly being able to kind of put into words what they're feeling. So it looks like you are a bit frozen.
Okay.
Maybe. Oh, you're back. You're back.
You kind of froze for a minute too, but now you're back, so hopefully we
Okay,
didn't
we're
lose each other.
back. I was talking about how you talked about how students may not know what they're expressing. But I'm just thinking, like, there's a reason the sky is black in your
Yeah,
painting.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right.
So it
There's a
comes
lot.
through kind of whether they like it or not.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily big on like fixed interpretations of things, but to have them tell you about it, and then
Okay, and we're back. We had a little bit of a pause there, but I'm here. Laura's here. Um, so let's get back to it.
all
I
right.
enjoyed your thoughts on kind of how the arts can help facilitate some of that wellness and well-being and the idea of the whole child that is so much more necessary now. But
Mm-hmm.
for my next question, since a lot of us over the next year, maybe even longer, are going to be going in and out of online learning, I kind of want to know how teachers and just people in general maybe can facilitate some of the child's emotional and social needs in a virtual landscape. I know one thing that I don't know who I took this idea from, but I started leaving like 10 minutes of my class time to putting the students in these different breakout rooms and just kind of letting them hang out for 10 minutes where they're just able to just talk and goof and
Mm,
send each other inappropriate photos,
mm-hmm.
probably, and just tell jokes, How do you think we as educators, can still facilitate and meet some of those needs even virtually?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like what you said you were doing. That sounds great because I think the kids weren't really having that opportunity, like they usually would at recess or whatever. So that's awesome. Like having a space at the beginning for everyone to check in, I feel like is helpful. That's something I was always trying to advocate for at XLAS, just every day at the beginning of homeroom, or even each class, giving kids a space to check in. So you can do that online, in the same way or similar way you would do it in the classroom, but just how they're doing, if they have any unique needs or whatever. Because I think often teachers go straight to the content, and I understand that there's a lot to cover and all of that, but I think when kids don't feel connected in that way and don't really feel like there's a space to show up as their whole selves, including their emotions, it just doesn't feel like as safe of a place. And so I think that's one thing, is just making space for that, for kids to share and check in. And if you have time, maybe wrapping up with something like that too. Like when I do a lot of group therapy, so I always like to have people check in and then check out, usually briefly too. So it could
Okay.
just look like something you're excited about that day or whatever. It can be really simple, but just giving everyone an opportunity to share, just I think can be really helpful.
I
So
like that
that's,
too, the check in and check out.
yeah, because especially with quieter students, if they're not directly invited, they're not maybe gonna share much about themselves, and it might make them
Mm,
uncomfortable, but I think it also helps them get more comfortable with sharing with a group if you're doing it all the time on a daily basis, and just learn things about each other and learn about their lives and what they might be struggling with. I'm not saying like go into super personal stuff and disclose everything about like some dramatic breakup or something like that, but
right.
just a little bit of an opportunity to say what's going on, I think can be helpful and really build cohesion. And they found that schools where they do that on a regular basis have these like circles or um, just reserve space for that time, tend to have less bullying, because I think
Mm,
because you get to, like, it builds empathy, like you get to know people and what they're struggling with, and I think you're hopefully, and what they found is less likely to pick on kids once
yeah.
you have those connections.
And
So
I feel kind of like an open sharing like that only builds similarities. Like it doesn't really
mm-hmm.
support differences. Because I know anytime I've been in a sharing situation, I never have thought like, oh, Laura said this. That's the opposite of what I think. It's either you're
Mm-hmm.
either like in agreement or indifferent. So maybe like that's kind of why the bullying gets cut down in those scenarios, because you get to see like, wow, like Laura doesn't like math class. I don't like math class, or and it kind
Yeah.
of focus more on the commonalities.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I always see that. Like people that seem radically different, have similar struggles in some way or another. So that's a good
Hmm.
point for sure.
And so, with your experience, the way that you described sharing makes me think that being able to share and vocalize how you feel is a skill more
Mm-hmm.
so than I've thought. So, how, and you talked about how the arts can kind of facilitate helping with communication by allowing them to express things outside of words. But how, and with your experience, how would you, do you have any tips, tricks, ideas, thoughts on how to build the skill of sharing?
Yeah, I mean, Well, just to go back to like even being able to label the emotion, I'm sure you've seen those like charts with emotions, and some of them have faces, like for younger kids. So, yes, that's a good impression. So, like, I think that's a piece of it is you have to kind of be able to identify what's going on, which often isn't really taught. So, people often just don't really have a good emotion vocabulary. So yeah, that's a piece of it. Just being able to be like, oh, what am I feeling right now? So those are resources that can be provided or things that can go over. I think what can be helpful too is if someone's experiencing a lot of social anxiety is to work on those skills that address that, things like mindfulness and deep breathing, and like to be able to notice like, okay, am I feeling nervous? What are the things that help me when I'm feeling nervous? What am I saying to myself? So like looking at this self-talk is a big piece of that, because a lot of times kids are saying things like everyone's going to laugh at me, or they're thinking something along those lines. And so kind of looking at what they are saying, how that's impacting them, can they change that? There's a lot of skills like that that aren't necessarily taught that much. I think they are being more so now, but that are just huge helpful life skills. So
Yeah.
those are some things too. I understand it's kind of hard for a teacher to address that with a whole class. That's why it's really helpful to have counselors. If somebody's especially struggling and can't share, then you can
Hey,
refer them
if you need a counselor or someone to consult, you've got it right here, folks. Laura Stanley in the flesh.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I do kind of have dreams of having some business that can be international so I can travel. So yes, thanks for that plug.
Yeah. No, of course, we're here. One of our missions is to empower artists. And I don't know if you would consider yourself an artist, but when you talk about things like getting students to be able, I mean, what you're doing to me is definitely not a science. So it's got to be an art. So I will
No.
call you an artist.
Thanks. And I mean, I think there is science to it, but yeah, I would not consider myself a scientist at all. I mean, there's just science to like how the brain works with anxiety, of course, and all of
Yeah.
that. But yeah, you're right. It's more of an art than than a
Yeah,
science, I think.
that's why you called it before this. We had a conversation. You called it a private practice. So
Mm.
you're practicing psychology. You're practicing
Mm-hmm.
counseling. It's not a you don't practice chemistry. It's like you mix
Yeah.
this, you mix that. It's that like it's not a
Right.
practice. You're just doing it. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're an artist.
Yeah, and I mean another thing, because you were asking about how to help build the skill of sharing.
Mhm.
Of course, it doesn't just have to be like verbal sharing. Like I think especially online, it can be really helpful for kids, to be like, okay, draw a picture of how you're doing or how you're feeling, or share a song that represents how you're feeling or something like that. And I think sometimes that can take the pressure off everyone staring at them and listening to them, creating something and then sharing it. And like I worked with some kids who would really want to like share their screen and do something, and I think it just made them feel more comfortable that the focus was off them directly. So that I think is just, a helpful thing to explore different
Yeah.
ways of sharing.
I always, because I was an only child, or I am an only child, and I've kind of always felt this comfort in spotlight. I kind of sometimes
Mm.
feel that anonymity can be stressful because you're kind
Hmm.
of not in control of your own perception. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you seeing me from across the room. I don't even know that you see me. So I'm not in control of your perception of me. But I guess
Yeah,
as a
interesting.
child, you're born and raised and die with the spotlight. Like there's no one else
Yeah,
that your parents will love that much. So I kind of feel
right.
like when people are forced to look at me, it kind of gives me a sense of control because I can kind of mold your
Mm-hmm.
perception of that moment.
Interesting. Yeah, you're giving me insight into my child as who's an only child and likes a lot of
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah, well, it is not even like even if he didn't like a lot of attention, he would eventually have to because that's all he's gonna get is attention. Because unless you like
Right.
get a cat or something,
Right. Yeah. Diffuse it a little bit. Yeah, that's interesting. I could see that for sure. Yeah, I guess for me as an only child, I'm less comfortable with that or something. Not that all, or sorry, did I say middle child? That's what I meant to say.
you have so you have brothers and sisters.
I have an older and a younger brother. Yeah.
Oh, so you were like raised by the boys, eh?
Yeah, I guess so.
Do you
One
feel
was,
like a lot of? No, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say one was 5 years older, so it kind of we were close at one point, but then it just seemed like he was so much older. I don't know, like we're just had different lives.
Once he stopped playing with toys, he was ready to be a
Yes,
young man. I guess at that point.
right, right. Too cool for some little kid stuff, but
Do you feel
um,
like a lot of women, especially athlete woman athletes, they say that being raised with brothers like made them tough in one way or another? Do you like how what do you feel about that? Do you feel like having brothers like made you tough? Maybe I don't know, maybe they're like rougher.
yeah, maybe in some ways, just the way they play or whatever. But I think, I mean, in retrospect, I think an aspect of that that maybe wasn't that helpful for me was that um and this is also given or due to the messaging we got from parents and maybe grandparents, like I feel like they were sort of socialized like they can't show a lot of emotions, and because I was around them a lot, I think I kind of internalized that too and didn't feel like it was okay.
Mm,
So yeah, I feel like tougher maybe, but like not in a
but
helpful
that's not
way.
good to right.
I think as a counselor and somebody who works with emotions primarily, like I don't think that's necessarily great, but yeah, it's also very cultural and yeah, it depends where you live, where you grow up, and all that.
Yeah. So okay, we talked a little bit about the connection between arts and wellness, so maybe we leave that. This is what I'm going to do. All right. I'm going to give you an elevator pitch of the Common Time company. I don't know. I hate calling things like a because a business and company
How
just
about
sounds so
organization?
like organization. It's a platform. I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of those words sound so like let me I've got a caviar meeting at the golf course this evening. Let me button my shirt. But it's really
Right, right.
so much more than that. It's an organization I like, platform. It's an ecosystem. That's
Mm.
something a word we use sometimes in our meeting. It's an ecosystem. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you a pitch, an elevator pitch on what we do here, what we are about, and then I want to ask you a question after that. Okay, what we're on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Common Time is an all inclusive arts platform, ecosystem, all
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
inclusive arts ecosystem that looks to connect artists, educators, individuals, and arts organizations through impactful and meaningful live virtual sessions. Our goal is to empower artists, engage learners, and expand arts outreach through our purpose built video conferencing infrastructure, which you are seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Our services kind of manifest themselves in a couple different ways. So, one of which is that we, in many ways, are a guest artist platform where educators can log onto the platform, look through our entire roster of guest artists. They can chat with them to see if they can align their curricular outcomes or their concert outcomes or their theater play dates with what the particular artist specializations are. And then they can schedule, book, pay, and conduct a live virtual session with that artist all right here in one spot. For the
Mm-hmm.
artists, we're able to empower them by letting them set their own rates, letting them use our platform to promote themselves. So if they have a virtual private student, for example, they can conduct that here without paying yearly premiums for other overused, server clogged video conferencing systems that steal their data and sell
Mm-hmm.
their pictures. They can use our platform, which is the first ever video conferencing service that is arts focused. Our
Mm.
audio isn't tuned for voice. Other platforms that I won't mention because they don't deserve it. Other platforms, you can't really perform music on them because they're audio editing your voice to make it sound conversational. They're
Mm.
automatically adjusting the volume of things so
Mm-hmm.
that it's not too loud or too soft. But sometimes the arts are loud, Laura. Likewise, we also offer live events that both our artists put on, and we can ticket those events, once again, empowering the artists. And we also have member arts organizations that host virtual programming with our built in audience and then other audiences as well. The idea behind this, since the founder is an international educator, as am I, is we wanted to democratize access to the arts. The same way you said you were, in a way, democratizing access to a mental health professional in
Mm-hmm.
China. If you live in Guatemala, there might not be a ballet dancer to come in and speak to your PE class about movement. There might, if you live in Uganda, I know you've got ties to Uganda, there might not be a theater professional available to come
Mm-hmm.
deliver a monologue to your seventh grade drama class and talk to them about recognizing those emotions and how they can put them on their face intentionally. Um, there for so in the IB, we worked in an IB school. They have that global context. There might not be anyone that's not Chinese in our case that's available to actually
Yeah.
deliver that global context for our students. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
brief overview of our service, but it kind of ties down to high quality vetted professional artists giving sessions to people that previously did not have the access or the infrastructure to support that. And we do a lot of professional development to help our artists get better at virtual teaching. Me personally, and our founder will probably co sign this. I don't think the concept of this virtual teaching is going anywhere
Mm.
forever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying
Right.
school will be 100% virtual, but this idea that you're bringing in guest artists and people traveling, I think that's just not going to be the same. So that's kind
Yeah.
of what gave birth to this platform. But for our artists, for our teaching artists out there, how can we take our specialties and kind of open them up to support a more holistic approach? Like, how can an arts teacher kind of insert some of these ideas of wellness, these ideas of sharing, and kind of meet student needs through our specialties? I know I told you before this interview that SEL, mindfulness, wellness, actually even caring about how the students were doing in general was not a
Mm-hmm.
part of my teacher training.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
focused on we have to play bum 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 in
Mm-hmm.
public on December 12th. If you feel sad, talk to your mama about it. Cause right
Mm-hmm.
now we gotta practice this song. So how can
Right.
our teaching artists and our art teachers in general add be more mindful of student emotional needs through our sessions and through delivering our content?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one thought I have is just making it more of an explicit focus, like when you give assignments, or well, that might not be, the case with the people you're working with necessarily, because they might be just going in one time. I'm not really sure, but
Mhm.
actually saying like create this piece to represent how you're feeling or something, just bringing it in more so they have a chance to do that and share it. Also, learning, like, I think everybody knows how therapeutic whatever art they engage in is, but but they might not know like why necessarily, or like kind of some of the science behind it. So maybe just like learning more about that so you can kind of bring it in more. Like for example, I've been reading about how helpful things like humming are for trauma, and like, you know, certain
Mm.
soothing sounds. So like when you
Is it
know that,
something about the vibrations?
yeah, I think I think so. It's like yeah, there's like this vagus nerve that can be impacted, you know, when you have a traumatic experience that I'm not going to explain this super well right now, but yeah, things like soothing sounds and vibrations can just really calm our nervous systems down, and I think people experience that, but just kind of knowing a little bit about it. There's this awesome book I've been reading called My Grandmother's Hands, about,
I know that book. It's about
you do?
generational trauma.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I want to read it, but I'm a little scared because I don't know if I'm ready to handle what it might make me think. Because like I have an old grandmother, and I
Yeah.
feel like especially for like Black Americans, we're defined by generational trauma, and we're just
Yeah.
talking about 2 generations ago.
Right. Yeah.
So
It's
I
not that
kind of been a little
far in the
bit,
past.
ooh, that's so, maybe I need to read it. Maybe this is like my sign that I need to
Maybe.
read that book.
And it's good to take it slowly. He even says that at the beginning, you know, don't like rush through it, like take time to
Oh,
do the
but
activities.
he
But
already knows that like this is a
yeah,
lot.
for sure. Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, that's a good book though, if you do get it, because he does talk about how like humming and things like that are really calming to the body. So, I mean, that's just one example, but just, I think if you can express that to the students you're working with, and even when you're like marketing yourself, I guess too, like this is what it helps with, and why, or whatever, could be helpful too,
Yeah.
because I think so many schools and teachers are looking for any way to help support their kids' mental health, because there isn't necessarily enough
Yeah.
mental health staff most places. So um you know, it's not like you're going to turn into a counselor necessarily, but at least weaving a little bit more of that in, I think, could be really helpful.
That's so crazy you said that. And it's just making me think like I've I went on this, not a phase, but I went through a period where I was actually trying to interview my grandmother about her
Oh,
life
cool.
because she is our matriarch, and I kind of feel like when she goes, so much of our family is going to go with her, and I kind
Mm-hmm.
of wanted to be the person that knows like this is why we were all born in Georgia. This is why
Yeah,
this and that.
that would be
But
cool. You
whenever
should,
I
yeah.
talk to her, I need to
Oh,
continue
sorry.
this.
Yeah.
But whenever I talk to her kind of about the past, uh, one takeaway that I have is like repression. Because when I hear
Mm-hmm.
her describe a few decades ago, I just always come away thinking like, where's the real story? Because I know
Mm-hmm.
the story from history, but you're telling a story that's kind of like, you were just you. I guess I was expecting to hear more trauma, but the fact that I wasn't doesn't mean that it wasn't there because we all
Right.
know like she was lived in Georgia in the 1930s.
Yeah, right.
So, but the fact that she wasn't telling me about it kind of made me feel like what's in there? And then
Right. Yeah.
what's in my dad? And then what's in me? Because if
Mm-hmm.
she's not even talking about it, then it had. See, I gotta read this book. Maybe I'm not afraid of the book anymore. Man,
Yeah,
I gotta get that book.
it could be helpful. I mean, it could be hard too, of course, but I think it could be really helpful. And yeah, it's interesting when people don't share. It's like, are they protecting you or themselves? Maybe it's hard for them to talk about. Maybe they
Right.
want you to think things were better than they were, or whatever. It's hard to know.
It's like her memory of the past is almost too positive.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
it's like I know that it just had to have been more. Like it wasn't just
Yeah.
didn't just go to school, then go to college and start a family and this and that. It had to. I know there had to be more than that, but I'm just not sure if maybe she was protecting me, maybe she was protecting herself. Maybe it's one of those things where she just flat doesn't remember it for what it was,
Yeah.
which is that's like a survival response too.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. It could be kind of a survival thing to focus on those. And I was just thinking about Umar for, other people. That's my husband from Uganda. And he
Hey
travels
Umar.
really hard. But he is such a positive person and focuses on the positive so much. And I think he kind of just learned that was how he could get through everything. So I think it can be just a response to a really difficult situation and environment, is you just focus on what is good and what you can control. But I think it does also end up with a lot of repression, which, can be hard at some point too.
Yeah. So let's clear it up a little bit.
Yeah, it got heavy
Enough
there for a
about
second.
generational trauma.
Yeah.
What music are you listening to these days, Laura? What are you playing in the headphones? Like what do you have on your phone? What are you playing in the car? Like what are you listening to?
I feel like I don't have a super cool answer for this necessarily. And like kids I've worked with who have let me know that Pandora is really not cool, but I still do use that on my phone. Do you know Pandora?
So
Yeah.
you're still rant like you're not choosing the songs you want.
Yeah, but for me that's okay. Like I like it because I'm exposed to other artists, and then sometimes I'm like, oh, I like this one, and I
That's
make a new
cool.
station with that. I don't need to, be in control of like every song. I don't know. Like I just
Yeah.
like to a certain genre. So I tend to listen to more like either electro pop. Like I have this station now. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's Para for Kuva, and it's a German kind of electronic music person.
Okay.
Or like Latin American stuff. I do like reggaeton and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So those are a couple things. And Santa Gold, do you know Santa Gold? That's one station
Yes.
too. Yeah. So yeah, those are some things I've been listening to. And just the
Maybe I should
radio.
start doing. There's something to be said about like experiencing the arts minus that control, because isn't that part of the appeal of good art, is that
Yeah.
it kind of makes you feel this emotion and you're not in control of your emotions anymore when you're listening to that song about forgiveness from Hamilton. You're not in control of your emotions at that point, they are. So maybe there's a metaphor somewhere in there about the whole
Yeah.
randomized aspect of Pandora.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. And there's probably much better platforms to do that on too, that people could
Hmm.
suggest. But yeah, and also it's kind of like sometimes it seems like you hear the right song for the right moment or situation. So it kind of like leaves that up to
Yeah.
chance more, which I like. That's my kind of woo-woo take on it too.
What am I listening to? So lately I've been listening to the new Kanye West album.
Nice.
He's totally, with his last two albums, he's totally pivoted into this like very spiritual thing. And I think
Hmm.
that has to do with like his mother dying, with
Oh.
um kind of seeing the dark side of fame through his most recent marriage. And I just feel like this album, his music has kind of represented my personal growth, because like he
Hmm.
was younger, he was here, he was just excited to be here in the hip hop. Then he rose to this monolith position where he's like, I'm Kanye West. Then he backed down to this position that's just like, I miss my mom.
Yeah.
I think I've kind of I haven't become a monolith, but I feel like in my
Mm-hmm.
career, I've reached a point where it's like, I'm just happy to be here. Then I've reached a
Mm-hmm.
point where I'm on stage with like famous people, and I'm like, whoa, I'm here. Then I reached this
Yeah.
point now where I'm just like, I miss my mom. Like
Right.
I have a family now, you know?
Yeah,
So
that
I
changes
kind of
things
like
too.
that progression that he's
Mm-hmm.
on. So that's what I've been listening to. And I've been listening to Pink Floyd.
Oh, nice. So, yeah, I
My
need to
wife
subscribe.
got my daughter a Dark Side of the Moon. You know that logo?
Uh-huh.
And I realized I never actually listened to. I know about it, but then I started like playing it, and I kind of like Pink Floyd. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, you have to watch it with that movie backwards or whatever it is, you know?
it's so. Lars told me you're supposed to start from the song "Money" and
Mm.
watch the Wizard of Oz,
Oh, that's right.
and it's
Yeah.
supposed to like line up with it somehow.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, any loose ends? Anything else you want to tie up? Anything you want to say to the people?
Oh, one thing I realized that I said that might have been confusing is I said something about I find where I work at the psychiatric hospital, the presentations interesting. I don't mean like PowerPoint presentations, but like how the clients show up. Like that's the way we,
Or like how
yeah,
they're
yeah,
presenting. Okay.
yes. And I realized that's like outside of mental health, that probably doesn't make sense. So anyway, that's one thing I was like, oh wait, why did I say it like that? But anyway,
So for the record, Laura's clients, patients, people she works with are not showing her PowerPoint presentation.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and that's not the part that I find interesting about working there. So, in case that was confusing and someone's still watching this to find out. So,
I appreciate that, Laura. Laura, I really miss you a lot. You know, you were one of the people that I felt a lack of closure with. I enjoyed being around you. There was a few other people at our back in China too that I hope to one day be able to connect with again. But I just
for
want to
sure.
tell you that you're really doing the Lord's work looking after our children. And I hope that you feel, I don't want to say proud because maybe that's not the right term, but I hope that you feel appreciated in what you're doing. I hope that you realize just how needed you are. I wish you got paid more. And thank you for sitting with me today and going over some of these things. I really appreciate you, and I couldn't have asked for a better guest on Common
Ah,
Time,
thank you.
our new interview series highlighting people that work in or tangent to the arts, arts education, arts entrepreneurship, and so on. Laura, thank you so much. I'm really grateful for you being here.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear. I'm really grateful for it as well. It was fun to connect again, and I definitely feel like you're a natural with this kind of work. Like maybe you should just go into interviewing, have your own talk show or something.
My middle name is Barbara Walters. What can I
Yeah.
say? Michael
Right.
Barbara Walters.
Yeah. So